Are you thinking about buying a home in Yucaipa, California? Well, if you are, you might want to hold off for just a couple minutes or at least until you've watched this video so you can get an idea of the ins and outs of Yucaipa before you make a big decision like buying real estate. So this video, we're actually not going to be looking at any properties in Yucaipa, but more just kind of taking a look at what it's like to live in Yucaipa, just in general, looking at some of the positive things as well as some of the negatives, right? The pros and the cons. So you won't be surprised about living in Yucaipa. Yucaipa, just a general sense as we get started here, is just a little bit further east of Redlands, right off the 10. And kind of sandwiched in between Redlands and then before you get out to like Banning and Beaumont, right? So you are in the, technically, right, still in the Inland Empire there in Yucaipa. It's a town of just about 55,000 people. It's got that small town feel, definitely, but it still has quite a bit to offer. So we're gonna look at 3 of the pros of living in Yucaipa, and then as well as perhaps 3 of the cons living in Yucaipa, so you are comfortable, right, looking at homes if you are thinking about buying a home in Yucaipa. All right, so let's get off right to it. The number 1 pro about living in Yucaipa, I would say, is just the immense natural beauty that you can find in Yucaipa. There are all kinds of outdoor options. You know, there's lots of horse trails, there's lots of hiking. You have Yucaipa Regional Park. So if you like to get out and enjoy the fresh air, Yucaipa would definitely be a good place for you. There are all kinds of parks that would be pretty close, depending on where you're looking. You wouldn't have to go too far to find a pretty good park. There in Yucaipa, there is, like I mentioned, Yucaipa Regional Park. You can get some fishing done if you're into that. You know, a lot of these Yucaipa properties back up to, you know, some foothills in the mountains there. And you get some really, really beautiful views of, you know, those snow-capped mountains in the wintertime. And then, you know, when it's summertime, although it can get pretty hot, you still have, you know, some pretty good amounts of fresh air if you get up right into the northern parts of Yucaipa. You know, it still is in the Inland Empire, right in the middle in terms of the hustle and bustle of everything, which we'll talk about in just a second. But just right off the bat, I think the first thing you'll love about Yucaipa is that it is just a great place for you to just stretch your legs, get outside, and really enjoy what nature has to offer. Now, the number 1 con about living in Yucaipa, which may not be a big deal for everybody, but depending on your personality, it might not work with you, is although you can get much of your errands and, you know, your goods and services there in Yucaipa, you may have to travel outside Yucaipa if you want really any good entertainment or perhaps, you know, that big box shopping. If you and your family are headed to Costco or, you know, Kohl's or, you know, any types of shopping like that, you may have to travel a little bit further out to Redlands or perhaps further out the deserts. So it does have that small town feel, which I'm sure fits very well with quite a lot of people. But, you know, you may have to travel outside Yucaipa on a regular basis for some things in your life. Now, that may be for you, perhaps not. Just something to consider if you're thinking about buying a home here in Yucaipa. Now, the very next pro about living in Yucaipa is that it is a great place to be raising a family, right? It has a very low crime rate. And in terms of the cost of living, right, it's still Southern California, so it's not cheap, but it's definitely more affordable than living, you know, closer towards the coast. Very, very suitable for raising a family. There are all kinds of after-school programs, all kinds of youth athletics that build right into, you know, a great public education system there in Yucaipa. So it's just very, very well suited to be raising a family. Okay, now the next con about living in Yucaipa, and this applies to pretty much all of the Inland Empire, I'd say, is that although Yucaipa has that small town feel, you're still right in the thick of things. So if you're not used to traffic and congestion, it is definitely a place where you're just gonna have to plan out your day and plan on, a lot of taillights. I'd say especially in the last 4 or 5 years, right when you get off the 10 at Yucaipa Boulevard, although there's all kinds of these new businesses and little restaurants and shops and whatnot that are great, it just provides for more traffic, right? And it seems like there's, all kinds of construction going up and down Yucaipa Boulevard. So if you're not used to just the amount of people, then that might come as a bit of a surprise. If you're commuting out east, that drive really isn't so bad, right? If you have a job perhaps out in Beaumont, or perhaps you'd be working further out in the desert, let's say, that commute isn't so bad. If you're working west, right, if you have to go through Redlands and then, San Bernardino, and those areas are even more populated than Yucaipa itself. So definitely something to think about if you're not used to the amount of just traffic and congestion living in Yucaipa specifically, and then more generally in the Inland Empire as a whole. Now the next pro about living in Yucaipa, and this is actually quite recent, I actually just mentioned it in one of my cons in one way or another, but Yucaipa has a growing economy and has been welcoming all kinds of new businesses, especially right there on Yucaipa Boulevard, right when you get off the 10. So if you're a family and, you have teenagers or kids who are about to be teenagers and you're looking for, summer jobs for them or for things for them to be doing in Yucaipa, there will definitely be opportunities for them close to home, right? And I would think that, the Yucaipa residents would be pretty happy to be having these new shops and these new restaurants and places close to them, so they don't have to travel to Redlands, or they don't have to, get over to San Bernardino, let's say, or Highland or Beaumont, or out in the desert. So it's definitely a place that has great foundation, right? It's very well established, yet it's still continuing to grow and bring these new businesses into their community. Okay, now the very last con I want to bring up in terms of living in Yucaipa is that the weather can be rather extreme. In the dog days of the summer months, Yucaipa can really experience, several weeks in a row of triple-digit heat, July, August, and even September, sometimes October, can really just kind of bear down on you with just constant heat that our area just has to deal with. And then on the other side, Yucaipa, and it kind of depends where in Yucaipa you are, right? How close up to the mountains you are, up to the foothills. But there are some elevation changes, and when we get some cold weather in this area, depending on where you are, it might be even a little bit colder. You might even get some snow that actually sticks, or at least some frost living in Yucaipa. People living in California talking about extreme heat might make, people from the Midwest or the East Coast kind of chuckle. But for California standards, let's say, one thing you might want to think about is just the amount of change in weather that you'd see living here in Yucaipa. All right, so there you have it, some pros and cons of living in Yucaipa, giving you a good idea of what life is like in general before you are buying real estate. Please go ahead and hit that like button if you've enjoyed the video to this point. I would really appreciate it. Also, go ahead and subscribe to my channel so you do not miss future videos. This one's all about Yucaipa, but I also have this one about neighboring Beaumont. So if you want to learn even more about Beaumont, go ahead and click that button on the screen there now. All right, until next time.